Ow Ow Don't Stop is the 10th episode of season 8 of 2.5 Men. This is directed by James Widdoes, and as always, there will be spoilers from now as I go through the episode chronologically and share some thoughts. On its own, it's an enjoyable episode, but I struggled to buy into Charlie's behaviour and Charlie's attitude. On the one hand, one could argue that it's actually some good character development, and I don't necessarily disagree with that, but I feel like it's too repetitive and that makes it not very believable. But I will expand on that when we get there. It starts off establishing that it's Thanksgiving. We have Alan and Charlie and Evelyn and Berta and Jake, and Charlie gives this heartfelt speech about family. Then there's a knock at the door. It's Courtney. She's back from prison, and despite the fact that Charlie has just given this beautiful speech about family and the importance of family, he runs off with Courtney. It doesn't really feel like a Thanksgiving-y episode, so if you're in the mood for a sitcom episode that feels very Thanksgiving-y, apart from that opening scene, there's not really a lot of that. That's not a criticism, just an observation. And we then cut to some time later, and Charlie and Courtney are coming home from Vegas. They're really happy, they're singing. It's a really nice moment because they seem to be in really good spirits. But Alan is concerned. It doesn't help that Charlie also got a black eye from an accident. He fell over. It was, as far as we know, a complete accident, something innocent, but this is the first of multiple injuries. And it's very clear that these injuries are a manifestation of not necessarily bad decisions, but bad feelings. And the deeper he gets into the situation, the more these injuries intensify. There is one that I thought was fabulously executed, but I'll talk about that in a moment. Alan then goes to talk with Jake, who is in his room listening to Charlie and Courtney. It was a very, very strange moment. I didn't really like the scene. I thought it was a little bit uncomfortable. They could have done the episode without that scene. I didn't really like it. Alan then talks with Berta. This is the following morning. And Charlie comes into the kitchen and he has completely hurt his arm. He can't move it, he can't do anything with it. And there we have our second injury. And then Courtney comes into the room and Charlie just willingly hands over his car keys and his credit card. It's very clear that he wants to make Courtney happy and he wants to give her everything. And this is kind of where I start to struggle to buy into it. One could argue that this is character development because Charlie of season 1, season 2, he was only ever interested in women for the most part, only interested in them for one thing. Once they've done what they need to do, he's not going to hand over cash. He might make sure they get home safely, but that's as far as it goes. Whereas now we see Charlie wanting to give his everything to a woman. And that's a very different side to Charlie. And yes, that is character development, but we've seen this in recent months, in recent episodes, so this isn't brand new. But the fact that Courtney has just come back into his life and he's now suddenly just handing over his entire life to Courtney, I don't believe it. I don't buy into it. So yes, it is technically showing us, or I guess instilling the fact that Charlie is ready for more. He doesn't just want a one-night stand. He is thinking of women not just as objects, I guess, and is thinking of them more meaningfully. And that is great. It's nice to have that reinforced. But when it happens every time he meets another woman or every time somebody else comes back into his life, it starts to just get a little bit ridiculous. And that's kind of how I felt here. I'm not really believing it. I feel like it would have taken at least a couple of episodes for Charlie to begin to feel that way again. It's unbelievable and it's unrealistic. So I can kind of maybe understand why they would show this side of Charlie, because they don't want to revert too much back to the love them and leave them style of Charlie from previous seasons. They want to continue with that character development, but it's a little repetitive and I don't buy into it. And that kind of made the episode not that great because I wasn't convinced. I wasn't believing it, and I kind of don't love that. But that's not to say that there aren't good moments in this. And then Alan is speaking with Evelyn and Marty is there. Marty is an interesting character, and Evelyn is treating Marty the way that Courtney is treating Charlie, and it's an interesting example there. I guess that was relatively interesting. And then Alan comes home just as Courtney is doing a fashion show for Jake and Eldridge. It's clear that she was out spending a lot of Charlie's money, And Alan does confront Courtney. He comes out with it, and I thought that was pretty decent. He wasn't just beating around the bush. He got straight to the point, and she assures him that she has changed. And after she says that, there's a knock at the door, and it is James, played by Jamal Duff. He has come to collect Courtney, and she insists that he is her brother. Which, when you realise that he is a black man and she is very white, it's a bit of a strange lie. And I think that having that contrast there, I think, was a good decision, because it very clearly makes it clear that she is lying. She does tell Alan he was adopted, but I think the fact that this is obviously a lie makes it, in theory, more funny, but also very questionable, because apparently Charlie knew about James, and he believes that James is Courtney's brother. Now, I actually don't believe that Charlie believes that. I believe that Charlie wants to believe that, so he's willing to overlook the obvious and is just accepting it because it means he gets to stay with Courtney. I don't actually think deep down that he believes it. And we do have a conversation between Charlie and Alan. Charlie is in the bath. This time he has a sore foot. And this is when Alan tells Charlie about James. Charlie was already aware. And then we cut to some time later, and things have turned around. Realizing that she is actually just using him for his money, Charlie and Courtney get into an argument, and she runs out of the house with all of her stuff, and Charlie realizes she's been using him. And this happened because she wanted money from Charlie to pay her brother's rent. And I guess giving her his money is fine because he gets her in return, but giving his money to somebody else when he doesn't get anything in return, I guess that was the turning point for him. And we do have a nice moment out on the deck between Charlie and Alan. And while up until this point, the episode just feels pointless, ridiculous, unbelievable, what happens next is so perfectly executed. I just loved it so much that it was absolutely worth it. We've had injury after injury after injury. And it seemed like Charlie had realised the reality of the situation, but then he thinks, hang on, no, I need to go and get her back. And because that was such a severe thing for him to think, that was such a terrible decision, that the universe has gone, no, we really need to injure you now to prove to you that this is a bad idea. He turns around, he smashes into the glass door, and it just crumbles everywhere. I'm assuming it's sugar glass, and it just shatters everywhere. And if that wasn't chaotic enough, absolutely, as I said, the episode itself is not realistic and difficult to buy into, but this scene was just so amazing because Charlie, having smashed into this glass, turns around to look at Alan and his face is shredded. He is bleeding. Alan is horrified by this bloody cut up mess, and he turns around and vomits in the piano. They didn't have to include that. The scene itself would have been powerful enough, but it was the icing on the cake. It was absolute chaos and very, very funny. And then they go to the hospital, of course, and it ends with Courtney deciding she was actually going to apologise to Charlie. She found out what had happened, heard he went to the hospital, so she goes there and somehow manages to get to his room. I don't know if she went past security or if they don't have strict security in the States, but either way, she managed to get to Charlie's bedside, and they say I love you to each other, and it's honestly just a bit of a boring, disappointing, not very believable ending. As I said, if somebody wants to argue that they're showing us character development in Charlie, really reinforcing the fact that he no longer views women just as objects and that he's actually willing to give himself, i.e. his money and car keys, that's very much representative of who he is and who his identity is, he's very willing to hand those things over to have a woman by his side. It is very different from early Charlie, but because we've seen this so often, and because Courtney has just come back, and it's too much too soon, I think it's just difficult to buy into. It's not very believable or realistic. But to get to that scene with the door screen was absolutely worth it. It was a phenomenal moment. So, in general, it's not the strongest episode. I don't know if I would skip this episode if I was binge watching this season, because it is just There are some really funny moments, so I guess I wouldn't. I guess I'd stick with it. But as a narrative, and looking at Charlie's behaviours, I just didn't love it. Yes, there are some great messages about not behaving the way Charlie did, and obviously the universe was trying to tell him that with injury after injury, but in terms of being entertaining, because I couldn't buy into it, because it just seems like the same old thing again too quickly though, I didn't love it. But we have some amazing moments, so I guess it balances out and ultimately means that Ow Ow Don't Stop is, I guess it's a decent episode of 2.5 Men.